Okay, my name is Amy Brumfield. I teach in the English department. Specifically, I teach composition. So I take my students, hand them fascinating reading material, teach them how to critically engage with it, and I expect them to write beautiful, concise, articulate, polished essays that are a pleasure and a joy to read. That happens every time. Okay, that may not happen every time, but that's certainly my goal, is to have that happen. So what I would like to happen in my life is I present lovely lectures, which are incredibly engaging, and my students hand me back a finished product, and we blissfully skip off into happy articulateness. Sadly, this is what actually happens. The English department actually performs a lot of autopsies. We get large stacks of essays, and they are dead on arrival. There are ones where I have no idea what the student meant to tell me, what they read before they wrote it down. My guess is they stayed up till 4 to compose these lovely epistles on things. And so I carve them into a lot of pieces. I diagnose where they went dreadfully awry, give them back weeks later, covered in comments, mangled beyond all recognition, and we all cry a little bit on the inside. Here's part of the problem. Our brain is a really efficient organ, and it learns by making connections between our experiences. So if we have a really strong consequence, we have really effective learning. If we have a weak consequence, we have ineffective learning. We need strong, repetitive exposure and incentive to change the neuronal patterns of our brain to learn the things that we want. Okay? So if you break a law of physics, the consequences are immediate and they are apparent. Okay? And presuming you survive, you have a lot of incentive to learn never to do that again. Grammar is not exactly like this. If you make a writing mistake, and most of us do, well, all of us do, many of our students make many, this is what happens. Oh, sorry. That also happens too. Okay, that happens. Nothing actually happens. Nothing actually happens for weeks, okay? So they turn in a paper the beginning of February. I hand it back 2 weeks later, and they get this. It is way too much input. It is way too negative, and it's way too late. It's way too late, okay? By the time my students get their papers back, their mistakes have fossilized, okay? They are already stuck in their head in a way that I can no longer do this, and they are bound to become English serial killers for the rest of their existence, okay? Okay. It is useless pain and suffering for them and for me. It hurts everyone. My students feel like they failed because they did, okay? I feel like I failed because I did. I did a survey in my class and found out only 30% of my students ever even attempted to translate the marks I made on their papers, which means that 70% of them never even bothered to look. 30 of them probably tried at least to say it on the survey. And of that 30, I would guess 2% figured out my mark, read the guide, and could apply it to their future work. This is a lousy way to approach these problems, okay? So the iPad program gave me a really different way to do this, okay? From everyone's perspective, it's better to see writing live, okay? So if I could see every student's writing live in real time, I can diagnose their problems as they're developing. I can discuss their problems as puzzles and cognitive things for them to play with instead of as a rule for them to learn. I can help them make better connections, and I can help focus on the trouble areas, and I can skip the parts that they already have mastered. But I can only do that if I see what they're doing in real time. So let me show you what I did. This is a program that I use called Lecture Tools. And Lecture Tools allows students with any web-based technology I can post a question, and all of them can submit an answer, and then they come up in a huge list like this. And as you might notice, it's anonymous. There are no student names attached, okay? So they get every one of their classmates' answers to whatever problem I posed all at once, in real time and anonymously. So for this particular one, I was teaching them how to use an M-dash. Now, in my traditional ways of teaching it, without an iPad, I would have said, hey, an M-dash is used in this way, it's spaced in this way, it works in this way. Okay, write this all neatly in your notebooks. Please use it in an essay. And they would always do this. Now, none of these are right. They're all close. They're all close. but none of them are right. But I wouldn't have known that, and they wouldn't have known that because I've never seen them write until they did it for a grade. And this is too small a thing for me to care about when I grade their essay. So this is never going to get corrected in any meaningful fashion. But now that I can see it in class, this is what I did. I said, okay, here's how an M- works. Everyone create me an example. And then they all created me an example. I said, okay, you're team 1, you're team 2, you're team 3. You take all of these examples of your own writing that you just created. It might be you, might be your classmate, because it's anonymous. I don't know who wrote them. You don't know who wrote them. Now go back to the rules and figure out, how close did we get? And where do we go kind of astray? And they got to puzzle it all out. They got to sit there and say, I think you meant, whoever wrote this, to do this, because the book says this. Okay? For the first time, they were looking at their writing analytically in ways that I could actually impact, and I could show them where they were right or wrong. But most of the time, they did it all by themselves. Okay? And it didn't translate into amazingly perfect essays, but they did get a lot better. And I got a lot more focused, and both of us were a lot happier about it. Okay, this kind of feedback is impossible with pen and paper. I really have tried. I really have tried. You cannot gather 27 samples and post them in any kind of effective way. It really is the only way to do this is with technology helping you out. Okay, my students' reactions to this. They absolutely preferred to interact with a digital presentation than hear one. I'm sure all of you would rather that I were giving you a game to play rather than just listening to me, okay? So the more I got them to interact with, the happier they were. They loved that it was anonymous. Loved, loved, loved that the feedback was anonymous, but that they could see if they were right or wrong. They loved that it was real time and that it was using their own writing instead of my own examples. No one thought my writing was that impressive. They all liked their own better, okay? And about half my students preferred to use their own technology over anything I offered them. One girl sat and texted all of her answers on the phone. It made her really happy. I have no idea why, but just thought I'd throw that out there, that they are happy with the pieces of technology that they're very comfortable with. My own experience. I found having access to this technology has profoundly changed how I thought about things and the ways that I can interact with my students. It gives me a lot of ways to give them feedback that doesn't feel like a critique, that it feels like it is a game to the two of us to say, okay, I have this goal. How do we get there? And they like it much, much better. It's much more satisfying for both of us. It is the first time in any of my teaching that a student has ever asked me for more punctuation instruction and that they seem happy about it. That moment alone was probably worth it for the entire pilot program. I could see how and why my prior teaching methods were failing. I gave them way too much information at a time, thinking that these were very simple steps, but they were actually very complex. Because I was good at them, I assumed it was easy. But when my students tried to manipulate all the pieces, I realized that's actually a 7-step process to know exactly how to place an M-. I should have slowed that way down. So for me, it was much more satisfying. To me, I could see why I wasn't getting my message across. I found that my classes are better if I limit my iPad activities to 1 to 2 activities per class rather than trying to go the entire span with technology. And it rarely went the way I planned, but that was okay because writing really never does either. So I figured it was a good lesson all around. So this has been a pleasure for me to do this project, and I hope to play around with ideas a bit more. So I've been very grateful for it. So
We have time for a few questions.
if anyone has questions, you're welcome to.
So you're talking about iPads, and you mentioned someone using a different technology.
Mm-hmm.
So what is really the software that allows you to see all the students' work anonymously, simultaneously?
There are several web-based programs that are free and allow you to do that kind of thing. I used Socrative, which is a quiz one, and which you can access from any smartphone that has web-based technology. And I used Lecture Tools. That one is subscription, but not very expensive. But it does allow you to do those. Those are the 2 I used.
How do the students like typing on the screen of the iPad?
You know, they loved having something to play with. I didn't have anyone complain about it, but we also had keyboards. The English department, our iPads had actual keyboards, so it was actually really easy for us. But they loved having something shiny. It made them happy just to hold them in their hands. Dr. Andre?
Are you going to expand this beyond grammar and punctuation?
Oh, I had lots of ideas, I think, of where it could go. This was just the first place I focused on because it was the most frustrating to my teaching. But,
Yeah, so what are your ideas about expanding it?
well, like I would just like to see a lot more of their writing in real time in ways that we could actually edit. Stuff we do by hand or that is clearly theirs, things that I can't make anonymous, people just don't make very good comments on. They don't critique each other very well because they know that's their friend or that sort of thing. So anything where I see that I could gather their writing and put it into a public forum, but leave it anonymous, I'm hoping I could build that into lots of different ways, into thesis development, argument development, those kind of things. But I'm open to other ideas.
So in practical terms, how does that change your grading matrices? So now you don't, I assume, have to grade 8 million papers and write all these things on them, but how are you doing it instead?
Well, I'm not doing anywhere near as much marking because I've found that that doesn't actually matter. So instead of taking the time to go and mark, circle every comma splice, instead I write them a small paragraph at the end of their grading essay and say, okay, I noticed these particular things about your grammar and punctuation, and we'll continue to work on them, or here's a reference for you or something. But it mostly just cut down how much I bothered to even look at them because it was frustrating for both of us.
Can I follow up by a second? So it sounds to me like it wouldn't have to be school-issued iPads to do this. If you had access to a computer lab.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, a lot of them, any kind of.
Amy, you'll have to repeat that question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nobody on the far side can hear that question.
Oh, no, on the far side. She asked if it didn't necessarily have to be iPads, just any kind of web-enabled classroom or technology. Could they do this kind of exercise? I would think so. It'd be better if you were more tech-savvy than I am. The iPads made it very simple. I'm sure people who are much more tech-savvy than I am could get anything to work, because there's lots and lots of resources that I found in my research. Anyone else? Perfect. Thank you so much for this opportunity.